Okay, everybody, let's recap the lesson. So we jumped to chapter 9. We're doing right triangle trig for a little bit. So hopefully we remember this, but it's called right triangle trig because it's a right triangle. And of course we define the sine, the cosine, and the tangent first. So you always start with the angle. You go to the angle first, and then it identifies the name. So from the angle here, that's my opposite side of my triangle. My hypotenuse is always the one that's the longest opposite the 90, and that's my adjacent side. If I were to change sides and make my angle here, it just changes that to the opposite and that to the adjacent. Okay, hopefully you know that. So sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. Cosine is the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. So ratio of sides. Tangent is the opposite of the adjacent. Then we have cosecant, which is kind of new, which is the reciprocal. It's one over sine. Cosecant is, which is then the hypotenuse of the opposite. We have secant, which is the reciprocal of cosine, which is the hypotenuse of the adjacent. We have the cotangent, which is the reciprocal of tangent, which makes it the adjacent of the opposite, okay? So in example 1, I said, let's find all six ratios. So I want the fraction of sine, cosine, tangent. I also want to find the cosecant, secant, and cotangent, okay? So then, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, 12/13. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, 5 over 13. Tangent is the opposite over the adjacent, 12/5. And then, of course, the reciprocals, if that's 12/13, then cosecant is 13/12. The reciprocal of cosine is 5/12. Secant is 13/5. And, of course, the reciprocal of tangent is cotangent, which makes that 5 over 12. Then we solved a problem, but before we did anything, we talked about checking your mode, because in your calculator, be careful, there's a mode. Angles can be done in one of two ways, either in radians, which we'll learn about, and degrees. So we got to make sure we're in degree mode. Always start with the angle. I know the 5, that's my opposite side. I want to find the length of AB, that's my hypotenuse. So I use a sine function, sine of 34, because that's theta is the angle, equals the 5 over the hypotenuse, C. To solve, I multiply both sides by C and then divided by sine of 34. So then we're going to have 5 divided by sine of 34, and on my calculator, which is 5 divided by sine of 34, and I get an answer of about 8.9. Is your problem reasonable? Does it seem reasonable? Yes. On the back, we took a look at how do you find the angle. So if you're going to use the angle, you must use the inverse, sine inverse, cosine inverse, tangent. Those inverse buttons are the ones that find the angle, okay? So in this case, here's my angle. I want to find the angle. I know the opposite. I know the adjacent. So I said tangent of the opposite of the adjacent. I use the inverse symbol, tan inverse. So whenever you use the inverse symbol, tan inverse, you're going to find an angle. That's your angle button, divided by 10. That finds an angle. So you get about a 38.66 degree angle, okay? Example 3, we had to find all of the missing pieces. So first of all, I went to angle I, and these two angles always add up to 90, always. So I just went 90 minus 68, gave me 22 degrees for angle I. And then, well, we thought, let's find side P, which is the opposite, the hypotenuse. We set up sine of 68 is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse, okay, which is P over 13. Then to solve, I multiply by 13, multiply 13. I just used my calculator, 13 sine of 68, and I got my answer of about 12.05. Finally, I could either use Pythagorean's theorem, or we use cosine, which is faster. Cosine of 68 adjacent over hypotenuse, which is I over 13. I multiplied by the 13. I used my calculator and got my answer, 13 cosine of 68, and I got my answer about 4.87, okay? Last example is a story problem, and I drew it way out of perspective on purpose. I wanted to draw the 6-foot man like this so you knew that when we made our triangle that we had to add in the 6 feet, okay? So we take the triangle from his eye. We have the angle. We're looking for the opposite. We know the adjacent. He's 50 feet apart. So we use tangent, opposite and adjacent. Tangent 65 is equal to the opposite, which is x, over the adjacent is 50. Okay, so I set it up. Multiplied by 50. Use my calculator. 50 tangent of 65. Okay, and then I knew I had to add in the 6 feet because we took the height from his eye. We got about 113.2, okay? And that's all I have. There's the homework for tonight. Hopefully it's easy for you. And I will talk to you guys tomorrow.